The pot roast was perfect. I'd basted it 3 times and arranged the carrots just so, nestled around the edges like sunbursts. The house smelled like rosemary, garlic, and warm memories, exactly the way Sunday dinner should feel in an old Victorian home that's held 4 generations of stories. I'd lived here since I was 23. My husband and I bought it from his parents the year Ethan was born. We raised him within these walls, celebrated birthdays under the stained glass window in the dining room, painted the porch railings every other spring. After my husband passed 5 years ago, the house got quieter. But never empty. Never less mine. That's why I knew today would be different. Melanie walked in first, as usual, high heels clicking against century-old hardwood like they didn't belong here. Ethan followed behind her, offering me the same nervous smile he'd been wearing for weeks. We made small talk over salad. Weather. Work. Renovations on their apartment. Melanie complimented the china, for the first time ever. Ethan asked about the hydrangeas out front. They were building up to it. When the main course was finished and plates had been cleared, I refilled everyone's water. That's when Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been thinking about your future," he began. Melanie leaned in slightly, all sweetness and strategy. "This house is a lot to manage on your own. It's just so big for one person." I nodded slowly, setting down the pitcher. "Yes, it is. We've already spoken to a real estate agent," she said, too quickly. "This neighborhood's booming. You'd make a fortune. You could move into a nice retirement community and help us put a down payment on a home." There it was. The pitch. Polished. Practiced. I looked between them, then folded my napkin neatly on my lap. "Well," I said with a small smile, "thank you for thinking of me." And just like that, I decided to serve something after dessert that they wouldn't expect. A few pages of paper. Bound in leather. 30 years old. And sharp enough to cut through every word they had rehearsed. The house was never just a house. It was where I brought Ethan home from the hospital, bundled in a blanket too big for his tiny arms. Where he learned to walk, staggering down the same hallway that his grandfather once ran through barefoot during summer storms. Where my husband built our bookshelves by hand, refusing to let a single room go without stories. It was the place I learned how to grieve quietly after my husband died. Where I kept the lights on in the hallway just in case Ethan decided to visit without warning, like he used to in college. The floors creaked in familiar patterns, like the house itself remembered how we moved through it. This wasn't square footage. This was history. And now, my son's wife wanted me to sell it like a used car. Melanie wasn't cruel. She was calculated. She never raised her voice, never insulted me directly. Instead, she wrapped her intentions in flattery and faux concern. "It must be exhausting to keep this place up," she once said, eyeing the grand staircase. "Wouldn't it be nice to let go of the burden?" She never asked what this home meant to me. She assumed, because I was alone, that I must be ready to downsize. That widowhood meant surrender. That age equaled weakness. She called it help, but every conversation felt like a gentle push toward the edge. Ethan didn't push. He followed. That's what broke my heart the most. He used to come to me with everything. When he was 8, he asked how clouds stayed up. When he was 16, he asked me how to apologize to a girl he'd hurt. But since marrying Melanie, his questions became statements. His opinions, borrowed. I had always intended for this house to pass to him someday. Quietly, respectfully. But lately I'd begun to wonder, was he still the kind of man who would treat it like home? I never said a word. Not when they started hinting. Not when Melanie sent me a brochure for a beautiful retirement community with lake access. I smiled. I nodded. And I waited. Because I had one advantage neither of them saw coming. I'm not just a mother. I'm a retired estate attorney. And this house was never left unguarded. Over the next 3 months, their suggestions turned into a campaign. At first, it was casual. "Mom, that gutter looks like it needs work. It must be hard maintaining all this by yourself." Or Melanie, casually glancing around the living room, "You know, open concept is really in now. Buyers would love this space." I deflected with polite smiles, practiced non-committal answers. But they didn't stop. They only became more coordinated. More confident. Ethan began arriving with spreadsheets, yes, actual spreadsheets, showing estimated property value, average selling price per square foot, and projected retirement funds based on a sale. Melanie printed out listings of what she called ideal condos, as if I'd been waiting for permission to give up everything that mattered to me. At one point, she even brought over a catalog for luxury assisted living communities, flipping it open on my kitchen counter while I was pouring tea. "This one has pickleball courts," she said with a bright smile. "And a meal plan. No more cooking every Sunday." I didn't take the bait. Instead, I set her tea down without a word and let the silence speak for me. They couldn't see it, but every visit, every gentle nudge, every line masked as concern was simply another line on the growing list in my notebook. I kept it tucked into the side drawer of my desk, old habit from my legal days. Facts. Dates. Patterns. Not to weaponize, but to remember. Because this wasn't about helping me. It was about what they wanted. About control, money, entitlement dressed in good manners. Ethan, I think, truly believed he was helping. Melanie had wrapped it up that well. But every time I looked at his face as he echoed her suggestions, I saw less of my son and more of someone else's echo. Still, I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's timing. I knew what they didn't. The house wasn't just sentimental. It wasn't just where we made memories. It was bound, legally, permanently, by something stronger than sentiment. 5 years ago, shortly after my husband passed, I updated our estate plan. I placed the house in an irrevocable trust. The Wilson Home Trust. It stated, clearly, that the property could not be sold while I was alive. And even after my passing, it had to remain in the family for at least one generation. No flipping. No cashing out. I drafted it myself. Not just to protect the house, but to protect the intention behind it. And tucked within that same portfolio, there was something else. A fund my husband and I had created for Ethan's future home. One he would inherit at 35. It had grown quietly, compounded annually. I hadn't spoken a word of it since we'd signed it into existence. Because I believe in legacy. In planning for the moment people think you're unprepared. And dinner next Sunday? That would be the moment. Because Ethan was about to turn 35. And I was about to remind them both that not every woman with gray in her hair is ready to be pushed aside. Some of us still know how to win. Quietly. Completely. Legally. The Wednesday before Sunday dinner, Ethan called me. His voice was tentative, careful. The kind of tone he used as a boy when he wanted something but wasn't sure if I'd say yes. "Mom," he began, "I hope you're not upset about the house talk. Melanie and we just want what's best for everyone." For everyone. I wanted to ask him if everyone included me. But I let him finish. "I mean, you've done so much already. This place has been great. But maybe it's time to think about what's next, you know? Something easier. Something that gives you more freedom." I looked out my kitchen window at the garden my husband and I had planted 30 years ago. Roses that bloomed without fail every spring. A magnolia tree our son helped plant when he was 10. I watched 2 sparrows land on the fence and felt nothing but stillness. "I appreciate your concern," I said gently. "Come to dinner on Sunday. I'm making pot roast." He paused. "So, you're not upset?" "No," I said. "I'm listening." It wasn't a lie. I had listened. Closely. 4 weeks. And now I was done listening. After we hung up, I went into my office and opened the safe tucked behind the bookshelf. I pulled out the black leather portfolio with the Wilson family crest embossed on the corner, my husband's idea, back when we first created the trust. I checked everything again, though I knew it by heart. Section 3B. The property located at 114 Cedar Hill Lane, Savannah, Georgia shall remain in the Wilson Family Trust and is prohibited from sale, transfer, or external lease until the principal beneficiary is deceased and one full generation of inheritance has passed. Section 6C. The Wilson Family Housing Fund, established in the name of Ethan Thomas Wilson, shall mature on the beneficiary's 35th birthday and may be used solely for the purchase of a primary residence. Approximate value at maturity, $349,880.92. Everything was airtight. Untouchable. I slid the documents back into the folder and set it on the dining room hutch, next to the china I would polish that Saturday. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt calm. Because I knew what was coming. And for the first time in weeks, I could finally say, so would they. Sunday came with soft light and the smell of rosemary and garlic. The roast sat warming in the oven. The table was set with the good china, the silver laid just right. I had decanted the wine an hour earlier, folded the cloth napkins in a style I hadn't used since Ethan's wedding rehearsal dinner. Every detail was deliberate. Not dramatic. Just prepared. They arrived right on time. Melanie kissed my cheek like she hadn't spent the last 3 months trying to ease me out of my home. Ethan looked distracted, maybe nervous. He carried a bottle of wine, held like an offering. Dinner began like all our Sunday dinners had for years. Grace. Small talk. Melanie complimented the roast. Ethan asked about the azaleas. I smiled and nodded and passed the carrots. And I waited. I knew they wouldn't be able to help themselves. It happened after dessert. As I cleared the dishes, Ethan reached for his water glass and said, "Mom, we've been thinking, maybe it's time we talked about the house more seriously." Melanie jumped in, far too quickly. "We know you love it, but this market, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And think how freeing it would be for you, not having to worry about maintenance." We even spoke to a realtor who specializes in historic homes. I paused, still holding a spoon. Then I nodded. "I see," I said softly. "Well then, before we discuss selling the house, there's something you both should see." I left the room briefly and returned with the leather portfolio. I set it on the table in front of them and slowly unzipped it. "This house," I began, sliding out the trust papers, "was placed in an irrevocable trust by your father and me 5 years ago. It has been in the Wilson family for 4 generations. And according to the trust's terms, it cannot be sold, transferred, or leveraged outside the family." I turned the document around and pointed to the clause in bold print. Melanie's face twitched. "But you could amend it, right?" I smiled. "No. It's irrevocable." "That's what that word means, Melanie." Ethan leaned forward, squinting at the paper. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I would have," I said, folding my hands neatly. "But the trust included another clause, one that required I keep the contents of the Wilson Family Housing Fund private until your 35th birthday. Which, as you know, is next week." He blinked. "The what?" Melanie looked up sharply. "What fund?" I slid another document across the table. "Your father and I created it for you. A separate account. It matured this year. It holds just under $350,000, earmarked specifically for a down payment on your first home." Ethan's mouth parted slightly. He looked stunned. Melanie went pale. "You mean, we wouldn't have needed?" I nodded slowly. "You never needed my house. You just needed patience." I leaned back and sipped my water. Melanie tried to gather herself. I didn't mean any harm. We were just looking ahead. "And I appreciate that," I said calmly. But looking ahead shouldn't mean looking past the people who made it possible. There was a long silence. Ethan stared at the documents like they were written in a language he'd never seen. Melanie's hands sat folded tightly in her lap, her nails digging into her palm. I stood, collected the papers, and returned them to the portfolio. Then I smiled, warm, honest. "Next Sunday," I said gently, "let's talk about what kind of house you two would like to buy. I know an excellent real estate agent." I paused just long enough to let it land. "One who isn't already working with your wife." They left earlier than usual that evening. No lingering over coffee, no long goodbyes at the door. Melanie barely met my eyes as she stepped onto the porch. Ethan kissed my cheek, but it felt absent, like his mind was still sifting through numbers, trust clauses, and the sudden realization that nothing he'd been rehearsing for weeks had gone according to plan. And I didn't blame him. I didn't feel triumphant, or cruel, or even smug. Just grounded. Like the house itself, still standing long after yet another storm had passed. The silence that followed their departure was profound. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and looked out at the magnolia tree. Its branches reached wide and steady, roots deep. This house had seen more than one generation attempt to reshape it, and had outlasted them all. 2 days later, Ethan called. He didn't start with hi. Just launched straight into it, the way he used to when he needed help with an essay. "I didn't know about the trust," he said. "I know. And the fund? That's real?" "Very real." He was quiet for a moment. "I wish you'd told me sooner." "I wish you'd asked me directly," I replied. "Instead of letting Melanie ask for you." Another pause. "She was trying to help," he said, though without conviction. "Was she helping me, Ethan? Or helping herself?" He didn't answer. I let the silence sit between us like a chair no one wanted to pull out. Then I softened. "I don't resent you. You're still my son. But this house isn't just a building, and I'm not just a woman waiting to be managed. You forgot that. She never knew it to begin with." He exhaled, slowly. "I think I need to rethink some things." "That's what turning 35 is for," I said gently. "Reflection. Perspective. And, sometimes, correction." That Sunday, they came for dinner again. No brochures. No suggestions. Melanie said little, but her tone was polite. Ethan seemed thoughtful, more himself than he had been in months. He even complimented the roast without being prompted. After dessert, we sat in the parlor. Ethan looked around, slowly, as if seeing the house for the first time in years. "It smells like home," he murmured. "It is," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it would stay that way. It's been 6 months since that Sunday dinner. The house is still mine. Still quiet in the mornings, still full on Sunday evenings. The hydrangeas bloomed a little early this year. The porch railing needs repainting. I'll get to it. There's time. There's always time when you're no longer being hurried out of your own life. Ethan and Melanie bought a home across town. A 3-bedroom colonial with a backyard just big enough for future plans. They didn't ask me for help again. Not with money. Not with anything. Ethan handled the paperwork himself. He asked me to review the closing documents before he signed them. He asked. "We're finding our rhythm again. Not the same one we had when he was 10, or 15, or even 25. But something real. Something rooted. Melanie still comes to dinner. She talks less, but listens more. And I've noticed she no longer refers to the house as too much space. Now she compliments the light in the sunroom, the detail in the crown molding. Maybe she understands now, maybe not. But she respects the boundary. That's enough for me. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evening, a glass of tea in my hand, and I think about all the things this house has heard. Laughter. Grief. Arguments. Silence. And lately, peace. Peace, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is protected. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to defend myself with emotion or plead for understanding. I just had to be prepared. And I was. The house stands, not just because it was written into a document, but because I never stopped seeing it as something worth preserving. And maybe that's the lesson: you don't owe anyone an explanation for holding on to what matters. When someone tries to convince you that your value is outdated, your space excessive, your purpose expired, it's not always a sign to defend yourself. Sometimes, it's the perfect moment to open the file drawer, pull out the paper that speaks louder than they ever could, and let them read for themselves exactly why you're still standing. Because legacy isn't something you explain. It's something you enforce. And that's how I learned that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy, when used by someone who's prepared. Has someone tried to destroy a joyful moment in your life? Tell your story in the comments. Like this story? You're welcome to stay for the next one. And if you know a mother who would quietly protect everything her family tried to erase, share this with her. She'll understand.